Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of leaders in pharma and biotech. Brought to you by Singular Talent, making hiring better for organizations involved in drug discovery and R&D. Marcelo Bravo is the CEO of OxVax, a biotech company building a next-generation dendritic cell-based cancer vaccine platform to take a new approach to some of the biggest challenges in oncology. Marcelo joined us to discuss his journey from chemical engineer to biotech CEO, how the pandemic changed fundraising, and the power of asking questions with an untrained eye. This week on Careers in Discovery, I am delighted to be joined by Marcelo Bravo of OxVax. Marcelo, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for joining us. We always like to start, Marcelo, with what you're up to at the moment. So tell us a little bit about OxVax. Tell us a little bit about where you are in your career. Tell us a little bit about where you're spending your time these days.
Well, I'm spending my time at home because I work from home, and I've been working from home for the past 3 years, like a lot of people. But this is particularly interesting because I'm running a biotech startup, and actually we started and got it funded during the pandemic and whatnot.
Right.
And we kept working. Obviously we have a lab and there's people working in the lab, but we do a lot of things virtually. So I'm at home, and that's OxVax. So OxVax is a spin-off from Oxford. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO. We went fundraising in early March 2020, had a couple of meetings in London, then lockdown.
Yes.
And everything else happened online. So the whole fundraise, and I've done a lot of fundraising for a number of companies, but this was the first time the roadshow was via Zoom.
Right. Yes.
And we ended up raising money from German and Korean investors.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and Korean investors I still haven't met.
I see.
Yeah, they haven't been able to travel to the UK yet, and so it's an example of how you can do things differently now, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's OxVax, and I'm running that company, and that's pretty much what keeps me quite busy, amongst other projects. But that's the main one right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And OxVax, from what I understand, is focused on a new approach to cancer vaccines.
Yeah, so it is a dendritic cell-based vaccine. So dendritic cell-based vaccines have been around for a while. There was a whole, for at least a decade, there were many clinical trials, and they kind of like were superseded by other types of vaccines. And what we have is we claim to have actually the super designer duper dendritic cell that you really need to make this work.
Yes.
And what it is that we're using induced pluripotent stem cells to differentiate a very special type of dendritic cell that has all this functionality that allows you to induce a very potent immune response.
Interesting. And I'm interested to explore as well, for the uninitiated, the idea of I guess a cancer vaccine might be an interesting one, because we think about cancer treatment, right?
Yeah, well, we talk about vaccines, but they are, they're not prophylactic vaccines. They are therapeutic vaccines, so they're part of the treatment. They're part of the treatment. In my dissertation, I postulated that you could think in some clinical scenarios in prophylactic vaccines for cancer,
right.
And I'm sure that it's going to happen at some stage, but we're working on a treatment. Yeah.
Fair enough. So we're not quite there for the prevention part of it just yet. Okay. Yeah. And from your point of view, I mean, without giving away the family secrets, obviously, the advantages of the sort of dendritic cell approach?
Yeah, well, dendritic cells play a key role in the immune systems, right? They're the ones that mediate and engage the adaptive immune response. So dendritic cells go out, sample the site of inflammation, collect samples basically of antigens, of bits of protein from either a pathogen or in this case a tumor, and then they started reacting to that, and they migrate into the lymph node, and then there they migrate towards the T cells, and then activate the right T cells, right? But there's a very rare dendritic cell in your body, which is called the myeloid CDC1 conventional dendritic cell type 1, which has this capacity of sampling, migrating, so in response to XCL19, which is cytokine that directs it towards the lymph node. And then once there, it migrates in response to XCL1, which is attracts, and then they home onto the CD8 plus T cells, the cytotoxic T cells, and then they'll activate the T cells that have the right receptors, in regards to the antigen that the dendritic cell is carrying.
Yes.
And they do that through MHC class 1 cross-presentation. So that function, those dendritic cells that have that functionality of migration and then cross-presentation through MHC class 1 are very, very rare in your body. You cannot really extract them to then try to vaccinate or use them as part of a therapy. And we've managed to achieve a dendritic cell that's not exactly the same, but has that key functionality.
Okay.
By differentiating induced pluripotent stem cells. There are certain tricks, certain patents that allow us to get into efficiently into this dendritic cell type, and that's our space basically. So we're cell therapy people playing with induced pluripotent stem cells, to come up with this very specialized type of immune system cells. And then you load those with signals, antigens, in this case, of a tumor, if you're trying to tackle a certain type of tumor, and then you put them in the body, and they will, boost your immune response. So they could be great adjuvants to, say, checkpoint inhibitor therapy, where you're trying to wake up a cold tumor and whatnot. Here you can stimulate that by helping your body produce antigen specific T cells, basically, both helper and cytotoxic.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. So there's a this probably isn't the right word scientifically, but essentially mimicking, developing an immune response that's naturally occurring, but then multiplying it, exactly. Making those rare cells less rare for patients.
And we're at the stage where we make these cells in the lab very efficiently, and that helps, because in the past people were using monocyte-derived dendritic cells, just because you can get them, you get blood monocytes and you can quickly come up with these monocyte-derived dendritic cells, but they lack all this functionality, really. I guess one could argue that it's not clear what these cells are, and you don't really have cells like that in your body, or that's not the functionality that you need to drive an immune response. And there's a lot of variability, so especially if a patient is undergoing chemotherapy and whatnot, in the quality of their monocytes, and then you get it with a very variable product. And by using induced pluripotent cells, you have an inexhaustible supply of cells, and you can control the manufacture of those.
Yes.
And get to a product that meets a standard and a certain quality and whatnot.
Makes
Which is
sense.
essential in cell therapies. The big problem in cell therapies is, manufacturing your cells.
Yes. Absolutely. And hopefully there's this progress being made in that challenge, because I think it's a real obstacle for a lot of companies, right?
Yeah. And I'm going at it now from a process development, coming from a process development angle. I'm a chemical engineer, really. And the challenge now to move, cell therapy forward, I look at it as a chemical engineer.
Okay.
It's a manufacturing problem. It's a meeting quality standards, establishing quality standards and process control criteria, and meeting in the end the product specification. So I'm, because you were asking me, about my career and so on, and actually, although I'm not an immunologist, I'm a chemical engineer, and I actually think I bring something to the party here when it comes to cell therapy manufacture.
Yeah, I was going to say you must look at it because engineering is a mindset as much as anything else,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
and so you must look at it differently than perhaps a traditional researcher looks at it. Interesting. We will get into
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to pick up as well, Marcelo, on you mentioned raising money through the pandemic, and you know I know this isn't your first time around raising money as you touched on, but obviously traditionally it was a very face-to-face activity, right? And I suppose raising money from Korean investors, German investors who you hadn't met at the time would have been pretty tricky pre-pandemic. So clearly it opens some doors that perhaps were closed previously. But what was your experience like of raising money in that scenario? And I'm sure there were benefits and negatives.
Well, raising money, the medium may be different, but the process is the same.
Mm,
And I look at raising finance as a sale, as a
yeah,
selling process, right? Where you're selling a stake into a future cash flow. So this project that doesn't have cash flow yet and
right.
whatnot, you're basically selling a piece of that, right? And therefore it's a very hard sale. It's much easier for me to sell you my house than,
Hmm.
than to sell you my dream that I'm dreaming of this house, right? And because when you have a house, you have title on the house, you can figure out, you can value the house, you can figure out how you can rent it for, you can calculate the cash flow very quickly.
Yes.
When you're selling, a future company, so when you have this idea or this project that's very early stage and in future could lead to cash flow, it's much harder to put that certainty of what the value really is. So it's a real hard sale, but the process is the same. And a selling process starts by creating first targeting, right? Understand who is your target, who you're going to go to try to sell your house to, right? Or your new product or your new company or whatever.
Yeah.
So targeting is really, really important. And then and then there's a whole stage of where you create awareness and establish rapport and relationship with that target rather than try to sell them, right? So if you look at anything in marketing, it starts you start becoming aware of it, and then eventually um, you try to convert that hot prospect or warm prospect into hot and then hotter, and then once the prospect is very hot, showing all kinds of signs of interest, whatnot, you try to sell them, right? That's when
Yeah.
you raise the deal. You never go and try to raise finance the first time to meet an investor. Typically for me, it's an ongoing process that can take years. So I'm making the rounds now, talking to people to tell them about the project and what we're trying to do. And yeah, in future, X X months ahead or X years ahead, I'm going to be going to a Series A to raise finance. This is what I want to have at that stage. But you go out and meet people so they know you. They start, and then you try to see them, with certain regularity
Yes.
as required to give them an update of where you are, and you start showing that, hey, you're actually making progress on this. And then some of them will express more interest because if you target it well, it's strategic for them, or is the type of space they're interested, or is the type of thing they're looking for. And then eventually some of them will become warm and hot and they want to be part of the syndicate.
Yeah.
So, and that takes, you don't start raising finance 6 months before you need to do the deal. You start 2 years before, or you start from day one and you're always doing it. And then some people basically leave you their card and say, hey, when you're ready for Series A, come back, and I will be part of that syndicate and whatnot. So what happened during the pandemic was that all that just had to happen through a different medium
Yeah.
that we all got very used to. So I guess what's good now is that you can establish a relationship without um, actually physically meeting the person,
Yes.
which is always good, and now, if I have the chance, at a minimum, I'd like to go and meet someone face to face for a coffee, for a meeting, for a dinner or something when you have a chance. But we've also shown that we can get a lot of that done without ever being in the same room.
Yeah.
And that opens the world, because in life sciences, you have to, when you're targeting, you say, well, actually, the investors that may be interested in what I'm doing are possibly in Asia, Japan, Korea, because they're really advanced, they're really into cell therapies and whatnot, or they could be on the West Coast. And and it's easier to get a lot of that relationship early stage going on Zoom rather than just flying there for the sake of a coffee, you know. So so things are the same, but hey, I think we're all embracing new ways of doing it, which is great.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, as you say, I guess the investors' motivations didn't really change. The concerns they'd have or the criteria they'd have didn't really change. It was just the method of conversation did. And it's interesting, you know, looking at it as a sale, which it is, you're absolutely right. Pre-pandemic, I used to do a lot of our business development, and I would spend a lot of time going and meeting with people who probably were very unlikely to ever purchase any services from us. And we still have those conversations, obviously, because you have to, but we do it virtually now. And so you can spend your time much more effectively with people that there's likely to be a relationship with, right?
Yeah. So I've started going back to some conferences, and those are good because they're very effective. You spend the day, a day sometimes. In one of these advanced, cell and gene therapy conferences, you can have, 30 conversations that are good, and that's effective. And even running OxVax, there's some people in the lab. We could choose to do our, meetings online because actually it's more convenient because everyone has things to do and whatnot. But I've actually started. I've chosen to do a weekly face-to-face, partly just to embrace the social aspect of being in a business, because otherwise you're just working by yourself in the lab and then seeing people on a screen, and so we meet to update, but also to exchange some gossip and catch up with each other and whatnot, and that's good, and actually in some ways it can be also effective because it allows to have more than one conversation at the same time. And
absolutely.
then for everyone to look at some data and comment and whatnot. So I try to do that. So I think it's about balancing,
I agree. You touched on this earlier, Marcelo, but as you said, you're a chemical engineer by training, and I'm really interested to talk about your career because you've had a really interesting path through it. So I guess to start with, tell me a bit about why science, why engineering, why chemical engineering, why this career for you? Where does that come from, do you think?
I was always like big. I guess I'm a very curious person. I don't want to say I'm a nerd, but I guess I am, an ultra nerd. I was always so curious. And then when I was like 12 or something like that, I was gifted by my uncle my uncle from America, right? Because I'm from South America, I'm from Chile. And my uncle from the US sent me a chemistry set, and I can, and I was a kid. And I remember I started learning English to read the instructions on the chemistry set, right? So I became crazy about chemistry, and I had my own chemistry lab at home and this and that. I ended up going to university in the US, and I ended up doing, actually, I got 2 undergraduate degrees, a degree in chemistry and economics. So in the US, you do a BA, Bachelor of Arts. So my major was chemistry. But then I went on to do a second degree, a Bachelor of Engineering in chemical engineering. And then what happened is that I was recruited by a consumer goods company, multinational, Procter & Gamble. People that make all these consumer products. Because I didn't know that at the time, but they recruit mostly chemical engineers. And I went to work in R&D, but I was never in a lab. My job was, it was called product development, but it was really brand strategy, long-term, and therefore delivering innovation to this brand. And I did that for a while. I was with Procter & Gamble for 15 years. Started in the US, went to South America, worked around the world. I was working in emerging markets across multiple categories. But I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I started this business. I was a windsurfer. I was really into water sports and whatnot. And I started a line of sun care products. I developed my own products, and I was making them in the US and selling them in South America.
Right.
While I was working for Procter & Gamble, and my wife said, well, it's either had to be one or the other, because I was traveling around the world, for P&G during the week, and then on weekends I was,
Yes.
working on my thing, and also windsurfing and whatnot. And so then I decided to leave Procter & Gamble, and put myself through business school, because
Right.
I was an engineer, a chemist, and whatnot, but I wanted to start my own business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I came to London, actually, for London Business School.
Yes.
Because I said, well, I'll put myself through an MBA, and then take it from there. And what happened was that I was doing this great project from my MBA with Procter & Gamble in nutrition. And as part of that, I went out and talked to a few companies, one of them being Boots in Nottingham.
Yeah. Okay.
And they offered me a job, after the MBA, because Procter hadn't, I had quit, but they told me, no, you're not quitting, we're letting you go and you can come back,
Right.
But actually, Boots offered me a job, and I changed from R&D to corporate M&A, corporate development. Boots was trying to innovate at the time. This was the year 2000, and they were trying to really innovate and expand, create new businesses and whatnot. So I went into new businesses, which was great. And I tried to then broker a JV between Procter & Gamble and Boots to bring to market all this innovation that P&G had put on the shelf for all kinds of reasons. They had invested a lot in nutrition, in functional nutrition, all kinds of great intellectual property. They had some products that had gone to test market. And one of them had done real well in test market in the US, but they ran a test that says, okay, great, sales revenue potential for this one is a couple $100 million a year. The threshold for P&G back then was $500 million. So it goes to the shelf,
Yeah.
And I said, well, this is a great product. Boots should launch it, but let's do something together with that. Didn't happen. It was two big companies. Both were going through all kinds of restructuring. And the entrepreneurial bug bit me again, and I said, well, if they're not going to do it, I'll do it. So I went out. I quit Boots to license that from Procter & Gamble, and I talked to Boots and I said, hey, I'm going to do this, and then you'll be my first customer. And I worked from Boots on the project. I kept on working on it. And then I left Boots one day on a Friday, and on the Monday I was back as a salesman, to talk to the buyer about the product. We have so the product launched in Boots, and that was my first company in the UK. And that's how I became a full-time entrepreneur, I guess. And this was in nutrition. That company eventually mutated into a pharmaceutical company. Oxford Pharma Science, and that company became a drug delivery company. So it licensed some technology from Oxford, sponsored some research in Oxford to further develop the technology and developed a drug delivery platform, basically. So all of a sudden and then that company went public, listed on AIM, raised finance there. All of a sudden I was running clinical trials, and I had run like 3 clinical trials, and I was entirely dependent on the clinical manager, the regulatory manager, the statistician, people that had come from various pharmaceutical backgrounds, and I felt I needed to increase my expertise. I wasn't comfortable, and I was Googling around one night, and I found this course titled Clinical Trials in Drug Development, and it was a 1-week course in Oxford, and I live in Oxford, and I said, oh my God, I want to go and take that one. So I signed up for credit and went to take it, and it was a great week. I was the only person from Oxford. The rest had come from all over the world. There were like 20 people in the room, and it's a mixture of people from the pharmaceutical industry, biotech, regulators, clinicians, people running clinical trials, some VCs, It's a really interesting group. And I did the course, and I realized that because I had been in the thick of it, running clinical trials with a small team, I actually knew a hell of a lot, right? And that's what happens when you're in a small company. You accelerate your learning, and
yeah, of course.
So I actually had a lot of experience, and the course was good to kind of like clarify some areas for me and whatnot. But that was module 1 of a master's actually, and I decided to take module 6, which was cell and gene therapies, advanced therapies. And it was a week, and I took that one like 2 months after that one, and it was a week where everyone in Oxford is doing something really cool in gene therapies, cell therapies, whatever, would come and tell you what they were doing. And I was like a kid in a candy store, it was like all these fantastic things. Because my Oxford Pharma Science was basically working with generics, improving generic drugs, and here it was all about cell therapies and CAR T cells and Kymriah and everything new that's happening. And so then I went, after each course, I had to go and do some work and present a piece of work, and I was writing my thing, and I decided to write it in immuno-oncology and macrophages for immuno-oncology. And I found a reference, that's one of the guys that came and presented, last week. So sure thing. And so a few months later, I went to talk to him in Oxford, and we had a great chat. And that's Paul Fairchild, my co-founder.
Right.
And I became really, really interested in what he was doing, which is, using induced pluripotent stem cells to then make, immune system cells. And decided to do the full masters, which meant taking more modules over time, and bringing every module back to whole science. So trying to really figure out how to. The masters is called experimental and translational therapeutics. So it's all about how can we translate this science and take it to the clinic. Because it's complex. When you're talking cell and gene therapies, everything we know about translation, you're cutting new ground.
Yes.
So it's just in our case, we have to invent how we're going to translate, right? Because it doesn't exist. There's no tried and tested methods. So went through a master's. Then I spent actually a better part of half a year, or like 9 months, in Paul's lab, and I had not been in lab in decades. Since learning how to do subcultures, learning how to do what we do now in the company, and using that time to really figure out how do we take this science forward. Because it's a platform, it can apply to a whole range of applications, both in immunogenicity as well as in induction of tolerance and whatnot. Because the dendritic cell is right at the middle there, right? It can induce cytotoxic T cells. It can also induce a tolerogenic response, right?
Yes, yeah.
And we decided to focus on immuno-oncology. And so out of my dissertation basically came the pitch for this company. So I handed it in January 2020, and then in March I went fundraising for it. So that's how that one came about. So so it's good. It's good. Came out with a master's, a few publications, and a company.
There you go. So there's a few things in there, more than a few, that I'd like to dive into. I'm aware we've only got so much time, Marcelo, or I could probably ask you about this all day. But I suppose the first one that strikes me is I've in my career, so I've been working in recruitment, but it's always been really in the pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical and biotech. There's a couple of other things I've done, but it's mostly been that. And I think the sort of the traditional opinion in the sector is that it's very different to anything else. It's very different to healthcare. It's very different to consumer products. It's and that it's such a specialized industry that it's hard to take people from one into the other. But you've made that transition yourself. From your point of view, how different is the pharmaceutical industry? How much of it is sort of assumption versus reality? What was your sort of experience of the transition from, I guess, healthcare and consumer products into pharmaceuticals?
Well, I don't describe myself as a pharmaceutical person or a biotech person. I'm really a science entrepreneur, so science, and in fact, a startup type entrepreneur.
Right.
And in that case, for example, actually, and I wrote a book about this, about science entrepreneurship, right? And because I have a method, and I realized that my method is what I learned at Procter and Gamble, and I didn't know this, but brand innovation, trying to innovate and launch innovation in the marketplace follows certain stages and steps and whatnot. And the way you do it at a place like Procter and Gamble, the way you've been doing it for years, is actually what now people describe as the lean startup method and whatnot, which is really starting from the unmet need, really understanding the unmet need, only figuring out that it's a real need and that you have a real solution before you scale it up, and having some methodology around that. And the key thing being start with the customer. In fact, get your customers or your patients to really help you from day one in defining what you're doing. So I learned my method on what I do now, which is how to manage a startup project. Actually, at Procter and Gamble, which is a big company, but in hindsight, I was in a division, Latin America, that grew from, I think, $100 million to like several $billion while I was there. So it was a growth. It was a growth scale up, big growth scale up situation. But then my job itself was, delivering innovation under uncertainty. So managing a portfolio of different technologies and trying to figure out which ones would progress or not, and then making sense of that in the context of meeting a customer need and a market need and whatnot. And that, you flip it around a little bit and adjust it, and all of a sudden it's the right thing to do when you're trying to start a new company. So I learned my craft back then, and yeah, it's very, very different. But the elements of it that you want to apply are key. So in doing that, you have transferable skills. We all have transferable skills, and then we have unique skills you can bring to any situation, right?
Yeah.
So in the context that I'm talking about now, which is a startup, I've become now I'm quite an expert. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now.
Yes, of course.
Very, very early stage companies and raising finance and managing through those very early stages when you have academic founders, and eventually you have scaled to a situation where it's an enterprise, with SOPs, standard operating practices and whatnot. So I've learned that craft, I guess, and that I do. Now, specifically within biotech or pharma, there are certain ways of doing things, and the key thing is translation, right? And that, in the case of cell and gene therapies, it's a new art, right? You're trying to invent things as you go along. How are you going to demonstrate your mode of action? How you demonstrate your safety, particularly when there are no clear methods to do that and whatnot. But that's, what you don't know, and then you have to bring all this expertise to the party. So yeah, it is very different. Immunology is very interesting.
It is, yes.
But I tell you one thing about that. It's chemistry.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so the moment people start talking about molecular biology and molecular medicine and immunology, and you start looking at it, I become more comfortable because it's chemistry. It's chemistry, So being a chemist at heart, I can get into it and I can start trying to understand it. So, and then as an engineer, you have this mindset, I think, as you said, of looking at things in a certain way, with a certain, structure and framework, attacking problems. Engineers, it's all about solving problems, applying technology, which is, underpinned by science. So being an engineer, I think, helps in this situation. And as I said, right now, we're really operating. It's a cell therapy, and the key challenge in cell therapy is manufacturing, and I have a lot of manufacturing experience that I can bring to bear. So in that sense, I have some transferable skills.
No, absolutely.
So the key thing is, yeah, obviously it is different, but if you're always going to bring something to the party from your background, and if you have the ability to leverage and connect the dots and see where your experience can actually make an impact, then it doesn't matter. Now you need, obviously there's going to be gaps, but you have to fill them in with people that surround you.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
never going to, unless you're a biostatistician, you're always going to depend on the bloody statistician, right? Because they are from another planet, right? Yeah.
Certainly,
So,
yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I actually, I was quite a statistician, but once you meet the people that in bioinformatics and or because when you're designing a clinical trial and you have to think about your endpoints and the statistics around it, and you need real experts, and they're very special people with
Yes.
a very their experience is very unique, and yeah, you totally depend on them.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
and yeah. So you've sort of answered my other question really, which was about that background that you have as a chemical engineer, and I suppose what you're saying is that the trick in it is being able to take something that's perhaps not directly related, that's not directly in the same discipline, but understand how actually what you know from here translates to here. And that probably applies to other things than engineering, right? You worked in M&A, you worked in corporate development, you worked in roles that had commercial aspects pretty much from the beginning,
Yeah.
from the start of it. So it's, I guess, it's the ability to take that abstract leap, isn't it? And go, okay, this thing over here, actually, we could do it over here in this way.
Yeah.
And I know you must have worked with lots of researchers, biologists, immunologists through your career. Interested to see what you've noticed about what your background brings that's different to theirs, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now I'm interacting with people that have been in an academic environment for the most part, or in a small biotech environment, right? And I think, yeah, you bring something, you bring a whole set of different experiences, Now, what I'm surprised by, I mean, the deeper your field of practice and knowledge, and sometimes you go deep and narrow.
Right.
So there's something about that where some people are just absolute experts in what they do, and it could be, you know, um, the culture of certain types of cells and whatnot, but to the detriment of ignoring everything else that's happening in the world, right? And but I think that comes with the territory, right? The deeper you go into something, you get lost in the forest, right?
Yeah.
So that's perhaps the difference with someone like me that can look at things, can elevate yourself and think a little bit broader about, hey, what's going on here, and where you have to go. So yeah, I imagine people that have the ability to become, super experts in something, just by definition, they focus, right? And they lose the ability to well, you can't, you cannot be
No,
focusing and
absolutely.
looking, I think the key is somehow get people that have different ways of doing things and processing the world to work effectively together. That's kind of like my task, to make sure that that's going on, and it's wonderful, when you get someone, and that's why I do this face to face, because sometimes they're in the same lab, but they're so focused that they're doing their own thing, and only when
Yeah.
they have those 2 hours where they're just around the table, they can start talking about and exchanging knowledge. Um, um, yeah. So yeah, horses for courses.
True.
There's some people that are like, ooh, and yeah. So it's all fun.
Yes.
I have no fear of asking stupid questions, and half of them are just plain stupid because just out of my ignorance. I'm
Right.
not I'm
Yeah.
not immunologist. I'll ask everything, but then I find that 1 out of 5 questions, actually, people look at me, oh, good question, or because for some other, well, it's obvious. Obviously, you didn't take him, know that you 101 or something like that. But something. Oh, well, actually, no one knows. What do you mean no one knows? And it surprises me that they haven't been wondering. But no one knows, and they don't even want to think about it because it's an unknown. Well, I think we should know that, right? Or if we actually get to know that, we'll be sitting on some, or either on a new patent or on some powerful know-how. So I think it's important that's for me, it's kind of like a culture I want to instill on the group I'm working with, continually ask questions, and even if they feel stupid.
No, it's interesting because I think in any discipline you get things that are sort of accepted as that's unknown, and that's we don't ask that question because nobody knows.
Yeah, or it's good to be an outsider just because you question things that, hey, I thought, well, because no one's questioning the question, but it's just because it's become accepted that
And the other thing I was really interested in, Marcelo, was clearly you had, from a very early stage of your career, you had this entrepreneurial disposition. You had this sort of drive to go and do your own thing and do different things beyond what you were, employed in the week to do. If you now were talking to Marcelo, who was still at P&G, who wanted to be an entrepreneur but hadn't quite done it yet, what do you think are the things that you would tell him? And what are the things, I guess, that you've learned that, you wish you'd known when you were starting out?
Well, I would have kicked him out to say, get out sooner, because I stayed in the big corporate for a long time. Too long, possibly, 5 years too long or 10 years too long,
It's easy to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it's easy to do. You get, and I got caught, I got transferred around internationally. Then you're, paying your mortgage and this and that, and the next promotion and whatnot. Life traps you, right?
Yeah, and it seems so important when you're in there.
Yeah. It's also very hard to leave a large corporate where you have the degree of security and comfort. People were telling me, hey, you're crazy, you're going to be a director soon. Why are you leaving? No one lives now. It's like, why? I've never looked back. It's been the best decision ever. Hasn't been easy.
No.
It's really hard to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
It's really hard, but I would not change it at all. I mean, now looking back, I actually think it was great to have that corporate experience. I learned so much. Also, this company particularly, I don't know about all companies, but this company has a great ethos to it, the values of the company, the values of the people you work with. You work with great people, basically. And I imagine, we were all brainwashed to do that, but it's a fantastic company. And I'm still in touch with the people I work with. People move on to all kinds of interesting careers, and you learn a lot. And that, I see people that have only worked in small companies, small startups or biotech or whatnot. They don't have the benefit or the luxury of the training you would receive in a place like this if you were in the right environment. I worked for some people that were the most amazing, most capable managers and people, high quality people, and that you only get in certain environments, and Procter & Gamble was one of those.
And I suppose there aren't many companies like P&G for a number of reasons, but I suppose there's something unique about being somewhere that has been not just a successful company, but as successful as they have in so many categories, in so many sectors over such a sustained period of time as well. This isn't a 10-year success. This is decades and decades, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess you accumulate some knowledge over that time corporately. I don't know if that's the right word.
Well, it's accumulated in processes and procedures, but also in values, most critically.
Yes.
And they're instilled in you, and you're rewarded for developing people. For example, you're not successful as a manager unless you can get replaced by someone better than you. And that's your
Okay.
job. So you're developing people and you're focusing on the people, and you recruit great people, and then you spend all your time and energy to try to teach them how to communicate, how to be effective, how to work, in an organization that's complex, in a team. Um, and 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 yeah, that's the secret sauce. They really focus on people, and so I benefited from that. It's a luxury.
Yes.
And people in small companies don't get that. Sometimes
No.
you feel like you're stuck in a lab, and whatnot. So it's hard. So it's hard for a startup to it's a key challenge, to create a culture where people have careers and develop their careers.
Yeah, it's hard to have the space to make someone a full-time people
Yeah,
manager, right?
yeah, yeah,
Until you get to a certain size,
yeah,
everybody's got things they need to
yeah,
deliver and stuff they
yeah,
need to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, it's interesting.
Yeah. So, so anyway, I'm very fortunate. I think that I've had that all those experiences. Yeah, yeah.
Fair. Um, so coming back up to date then, coming back to
Mm.
OxVax, tell us a little bit about what's going on now, what's next, what's the future, the immediate future hold for you guys?
Yeah, yeah. So we spun off in April 2021.
Hmm.
Finally. The first 12 months we were focused on first getting the lab going,
Yeah.
just getting started.
Yeah.
We started out of the Dunn School of Pathology, but the university had been closed. So we restarted the lab, and we had some immediate milestones to meet, and we met those, which were all around characterizing the cells we were making and whatnot. And then, this year we've been focusing on developing a number of assays to demonstrate this functionality, functionality of migration, functionality of cross-presentation, functionality of, then these dendritic cells inducing the right T-cell response, and demonstrating that by various models and whatnot. And as people will know, developing these assays usually takes longer and is more complex than.
Of course.
So we were doing that, and we're very happy with the data that's emerging. So we're basically building a very robust data package, and the idea is in the coming months to now, because it's all being kind of like generic using model antigens, to demonstrate the functionality. Now we're going to move into an indication specific mode, so develop a data package specific to the indication we're going to be pursuing as a lead indication, and using that data to go for a Series A. So hopefully in sometime next year. As you know, the environment is difficult right now for
Sure. Yeah.
fundraising, but I think it's all about the strength of the data, and then some planets need to be aligned properly in terms of finding the people that have the appetite, or
Yeah, of course.
that are interested strategically in the space where whatever you're doing makes sense. So we're going to start making those moves in the new year. So yeah. So I mean, my goal is to take this to a clinical trial as soon as possible.
Yeah, of course.
That's basically what you look for when you're in an early stage life sciences company. And,
Definitely. Well, it sounds like an exciting time. We wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much for joining us, Marcelo.
Good. Thank you for inviting me. It was great.
Thanks for joining us on Careers in Discovery, and don't forget to subscribe for more insight into the world of drug discovery and R&D. Do take a look at our sponsors, Singular Talent, and their mission to make hiring better for companies and individuals in drug discovery and R&D. You can find them at www.singulartalent.io. See you next time.